Marcus Elaine had $23.17 in her checking account on the morning her daughter left for college. Not $23.17 after the last tuition payment. Not $23.17 after the gas she put in the car to drive 4 hours to Evansville and back. $23.17 for any of it. That was the farewell breakfast, the tank of gas, and the 2 weeks of groceries for one that would follow, all of them living inside the same number. Her daughter, Adrienne, was 18. She had been accepted to the University of Southern Indiana on a partial merit scholarship, which covered 60% of tuition and none of the housing. The housing was $4,800 a semester. That was the number Elaine had been working toward for 14 months, the number she kept written in pencil on the inside cover of the small notebook she carried in her jacket pocket. The one with the broken clasp she'd meant to replace for 2 years and never had. She had gotten there. Barely, but she had gotten there. Adrienne stood in the doorway of the apartment on Clover Street in Terre Haute, with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a laundry basket wedged against her hip. She was wearing the sneakers Elaine had bought her in July, the only new thing she had purchased since spring. She looked at her mother. She said, "You don't have to come all the way, Mom." Elaine said, "I know." She picked up the second laundry basket anyway. 3 years before that morning, Elaine Marcus had been working the front desk at a medical billing office on Washington Avenue, 41 years old, recently divorced, and in possession of a checking account that averaged $340 between paydays when she was careful and considerably less when the car needed anything. The divorce had not been dramatic. It had been quiet in the way that some marriages end, not with a confrontation or a discovery, but with a slow, mutual acknowledgement that two people had become strangers who shared a lease. Her ex-husband Patrick had moved to Cincinnati. He paid child support on the first of every month with the consistency of a man who was determined to fulfill exactly what was legally required and nothing more. It arrived on time. It was never enough. Elaine had stopped being surprised by either of those facts by the end of the first year. Adrienne was 15 when the marriage ended. She handled it the way she handled most things, by not saying much and by doing her homework at the kitchen table every evening without being asked. She was not a cheerful teenager. She was a deliberate one. She read books that nobody assigned her. She kept a planner that she updated in pen, not pencil, because she told Elaine once that using pen forced her to commit. Elaine watched her daughter that first year and thought, "She is going to be fine." And then she thought, "She is going to be fine because she has decided to be, and that decision is costing her something I can't see." The apartment on Clover Street had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom with a shower head that ran cold on the left side, and a kitchen window that looked directly into the brick wall of the building next door. The rent was $780 a month. It had been $750 when they moved in, and the landlord had raised it twice in 3 years by amounts small enough to seem unreasonable to protest and large enough to matter. Elaine did not protest. She adjusted. She worked the billing desk Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. She picked up Saturday shifts at a grocery warehouse on the east side that paid $12 an hour in cash. She came home on Saturdays smelling like cardboard and refrigeration, changed her clothes in the bathroom with the door closed, and made dinner before Adrienne got home from her shift at the sandwich shop on Campus Road where she had been working since she turned 16. Neither of them talked about money directly. They talked around it the way people talk around things that are always present and never entirely manageable. Adrienne would say, "I don't need anything for the school trip." Before Elaine had a chance to ask, Elaine would say, "I found a good deal on the pasta," when she meant she had checked 3 stores and bought the brand that was 40 cents cheaper. They had developed the language for it, specific and unspoken and understood by both. Beverly Osei worked the cubicle to Elaine's left at the billing office. She was 54, had raised 3 children on a single income for most of their childhoods after her first husband lost his license, and possessed the particular calm of someone who has been through enough that most things no longer had the power to surprise her. She kept a small plant on her desk that she watered every Tuesday. She brought her lunch in a blue cooler. She had opinions about everything and shared them only when asked, which made the opinions, when they came, feel like they mattered. One afternoon in November, Elaine was at her desk rerunning a claim that had been rejected for the 3rd time due to a coding error she had not made. Beverly looked over without turning her head all the way. She said, "You eat lunch today." Elaine said, "I had something." Beverly said, "A granola bar is not something." Elaine didn't respond. Beverly reached into her blue cooler and set a container of rice and chicken on Elaine's desk without further comment. Then she went back to her screen. Elaine looked at the container. She said, "Beverly, I'm not taking your lunch." Beverly said, "I packed extra." She hadn't. Elaine knew she hadn't. She ate it anyway. It was the first hot food she'd had since Tuesday. Sometimes accepting what someone offers you is the kindest thing you can do for them. And for yourself, that was something Elaine understood only slowly, and mostly because Beverly kept demonstrating it without ever saying it out loud. Adrienne's junior year was the year the plan started. It had not been called a plan at first. It had been called, "Let's look at some schools," which is the way parents open conversations they have been preparing for in private, for longer than their children know. Elaine had been looking at schools since Adrienne's freshman year. She had bookmarked pages on her phone. She had read the financial aid sections more carefully than any other section. She had run numbers on the back of envelopes and then thrown the envelopes away because seeing the numbers in writing made them feel more fixed than they were. Adrienne sat at the kitchen table with a laptop open and a cup of tea she had made herself. She pulled up a list. She said, "I want to study environmental science." Elaine said, "Okay." Adrienne said, "USI has a good program. It's 4 hours away." Elaine said, "I know." Adrienne said, "I already looked at the scholarships." She slid the laptop across the table. Elaine looked at the screen. Merit scholarship. Renewable. 60% of tuition. Minimum 3.4 GPA. Adrienne's GPA was 3.9. Elaine did not cry at the kitchen table. She did the math instead, quickly, the way she always did math, in her head, without letting her face change. 60% of tuition, 40% remaining. Housing, books, the miscellaneous fees that were listed individually on the cost sheet and added up to more than people expected. She looked at the number on the screen. She looked at her daughter. She said, "We can make this work." She did not know if that was true yet, but she had learned that some sentences need to be said before they are certain, because saying them is part of how they become true. The following morning she opened the small notebook with the broken clasp. She wrote a number in pencil on the inside cover. It was the amount she needed to save in 14 months for Adrienne's first semester housing. She underlined it once. She closed the notebook. She put it in her jacket pocket and went to work. The second year was the year everything tried to undo the math. In February, the car needed a new alternator, $290. She paid it on a Tuesday afternoon and sat in the waiting room of the auto shop on 7th Street reading a magazine she had no interest in because it was the only thing available and she needed somewhere to put her eyes while she waited for the total to confirm what she had already been told. In April, Adrienne got sick. A respiratory infection that turned into bronchitis that required 2 doctor visits and an antibiotic that cost $67 because the generic was backordered. Elaine paid the $67 without pausing. She paused on everything else. She did not pause on that. In June, the building raised the rent again, $40. She called the landlord. He said it was a market adjustment. She said she understood. She hung up. She opened the notebook and changed the number. She picked up an extra shift at the warehouse, then another. By September, she was working 6 days a week. She came home on Friday evenings and sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes before she could move to the couch. Adrienne would make tea without being asked. She would set it on the coffee table next to where Elaine sat with her head back and her eyes closed. She never said anything. She just made the tea and left it there. One evening, Beverly mentioned it. They were in the break room at the billing office, the small one with the single window that looked out onto the parking lot. Beverly said, "When's the last time you did something for yourself, Elaine?" Elaine said, "I bought a candle last month." Beverly looked at her with a patience that said she had been ready for exactly that answer. She said, "For the bathroom? Or for Adrienne's room?" Elaine said, "The bathroom smelled." Beverly said, "The bathroom smelled. That's what I thought." They went back to their desks. Beverly did not bring it up again. But she had said it, and Elaine had heard it, and some things work that way. They sit in the back of your mind like a pebble in a shoe. Not painful enough to stop everything, but present enough that you can't entirely forget it. The notebook number was within reach by October. Not comfortably, not with room to spare, but reachable if nothing else went wrong. Elaine knew better than to think about it that way. She had learned not to count on things until they were in hand. She counted days instead, weeks, shifts. A woman named Lorraine Chu lived in the apartment directly across the hall on the third floor of the Clover Street building. She was 67 years old. She had taught high school chemistry in Terre Haute for 31 years before retiring. Her husband had died 4 years earlier. Her daughter lived in Portland and called on Sundays and sometimes Wednesdays, which Lorraine said was more than enough. She had a cat named Hendrix that she walked on a leash in the parking lot, which Adrienne found endearing and which Elaine found quietly remarkable as a life choice. Lorraine had noticed the schedule before she had noticed Elaine. The early mornings, the late returns on Saturdays, the way the door across the hall opened and closed at hours that indicated a person whose time belonged almost entirely to other demands. She recognized it the way you recognize something you have watched for a long time from a distance. She introduced herself in the elevator in December when Elaine was carrying 2 bags of groceries and a package from the post office. Lorraine held the door. She said, "I'm Lorraine, across from 3C. Elaine said her name. Lorraine said, "You got a teenager?" Elaine said, "I do." Lorraine said, "I had one of those. You survive it." She said it without irony, which made it land differently than it would have otherwise. She did not knock on Elaine's door that week. She did not bring a casserole or offer unsolicited advice. She left a card under the door in January that said, "I'm in 3D if you need anything." And below that, "Or if you just want to sit somewhere quiet for a minute." The handwriting was careful and unhurried. Elaine put the card in the kitchen drawer. She looked at it twice in the following weeks. She didn't knock on Lorraine's door. Not yet. The night Adrienne got her acceptance letter was a Thursday in March. She received it by email at 6:47 p.m. Elaine was still in her coat when Adrienne came out of her bedroom holding her phone with both hands. She didn't say anything. She just held up the phone. Elaine read the screen. She set her bag down on the floor. She sat down on the couch, not because she chose to, but because her legs made the decision first. She looked at the email. She looked at Adrienne. She said, "You did it." Adrienne sat down next to her. She said, "We did it." They sat on the couch for a long time without saying anything else. The apartment was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere below them, a door closed. The particular silence of 2 people in the middle of something real and complete. That night, after Adrienne had gone to bed, Elaine opened the notebook. She looked at the number. She looked at what she had saved. The gap between them was still $340. She put the notebook down. She got up and stood at the kitchen window looking at the brick wall of the building next door. She thought about her mother, who had worked the counter at a dry cleaner in Indianapolis for 22 years, and who had said once, when Elaine was small and asking about something she couldn't have, "You work with what the day gives you, not what you wish it gave you." The day had not given her the last $340. She would get there the way she always got there, by working the problem one shift at a time. She closed the window. She went to bed. She got there by May. The number in the notebook matched the number in the bank account on the Sunday afternoon. She did not celebrate. She transferred the money to a separate account she had opened at a different bank, so she would not accidentally spend it. Then she sat at the kitchen table and felt something she did not have a word for. Not relief exactly, not triumph, something quieter. The specific stillness of a person who has carried something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Adrienne spent the summer working extra shifts at the sandwich shop and packing her room in boxes that accumulated in the hallway until the apartment felt like it was being slowly disassembled. She did not talk about leaving. She talked about what she was excited to study. She talked about a professor whose research she had read. She was deliberate about the future in the same way she was deliberate about everything. Forward-facing, already there in her mind. Elaine watched her pack and said nothing that mattered about it. On the last Thursday before the move, Elaine knocked on Lorraine's door. Lorraine opened it in the way of someone who had not been surprised by a knock in a very long time. She looked at Elaine. She said, "Come in." They sat at Lorraine's kitchen table with tea. Hendricks moved across the floor between them and settled on the rug by the window. Lorraine did not ask what the visit was about. She waited. The way a person waits when they have been a teacher and they understand that some things come out only when the silence is comfortable enough. Elaine said, "She leaves Sunday." Lorraine said, "I know." A pause. Elaine said, "I don't know what I did right with her. I don't know if I did anything right. I just kept going." Lorraine looked at her. She said, "In 31 years of teaching, I watched thousands of students walk out of my classroom. The ones who were okay, who were genuinely okay, had one thing in common." She paused. They had at least one person who showed up. Not perfectly, not with the right words or the right resources, just consistently, that's all. Just consistently there. She picked up her cup. She said, "That's what you gave her." Elaine didn't respond. She looked at her hands. The knuckle on her right index finger was rough from where she'd caught it on a shelf at the warehouse in March, and it had healed imperfectly because she hadn't had time to do anything about it correctly. Lorraine said, "I had a student, years ago. Girl named Tessie. Came to school every day in the same jacket for 3 winters. I mean the same jacket, too small by the 3rd year. Zipper broken, pocket held together with a safety pin. I knew the situation at home. I offered her a jacket from the lost and found once. She looked at me like I had suggested something embarrassing. She paused. I let it go. At the end of the year, she left me a card. It said, 'Thank you for treating me like I wasn't a problem to solve.'" Elaine was looking at the table. Lorraine said, "You didn't treat your daughter like a problem to solve. You treated her like a person who was going to figure it out. And she believed you because you believed it first." They sat in the quiet of the apartment for a while. Hendricks stretched and resettled. The evening light came through the window in long strips across the linoleum floor. Elaine said, "I still don't know how we got here." Lorraine said, "Yes, you do. You just did it one day at a time and forgot to notice." Sunday came. The car was packed by 9 in the morning. 2 laundry baskets, a duffel bag, a box of books, a small lamp, a plastic bin of school supplies that Adrienne had assembled and labeled herself. Lorraine came out of 3D as they were making the last trip down the hallway. She handed Adrienne a paper bag. Inside was a small succulent in a clay pot and a card. Adrienne hugged her. Lorraine patted her twice on the back with the efficiency of someone who meant it and didn't need to extend it. They drove 4 hours south on I-70, then down through the flatlands of southwestern Indiana with the windows down because the air conditioning in the car had been marginal since March, and Elaine had decided not to address it until the fall. Adrienne had her feet on the dashboard the way she always did on long drives. She talked for the first hour, then put in one earbud and looked out the window. Elaine drove. The dorm was a building called Brentwood Hall. They carried everything up in 2 trips. The room was small. The bed was already made with sheets Elaine had bought the previous month on clearance. White with a thin blue stripe, $14.99 for the set. The lamp went on the desk. The books went on the shelf. The succulent went on the windowsill. When it was done, they stood in the room and looked at it. It did not take long to look at because it was small and they had not brought much. But it was right. Everything was where it should be. Adrienne said, "You can stay." Elaine said, "I should get back before it's dark." Adrienne said, "I know." They stood there for another moment. Elaine looked at her daughter in that room, 18 years old, ready in all the ways that mattered, carrying none of the weight she had been carrying in ways Elaine could see, and all of it in ways Elaine could not. She pulled her into a hug. Adrienne hugged back. Both arms, the way she had when she was small. Elaine held on for a moment longer than she needed to. Then, she let go. She drove home in 4 hours and 20 minutes because the traffic through Indianapolis was bad on Sunday evenings. She stopped at a gas station outside of Cloverdale and bought a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels. She ate the pretzels in the parking lot before she got back on the highway. She was not hungry. She just needed something to do with her hands. The apartment felt the way apartments feel when someone who has been in them for years is suddenly not empty, still furnished. Still the same walls and the same window looking at the same brick, but different in the way of something that has changed in a direction that cannot be reversed and should not be. Elaine put her bag down. She stood in the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and looked at it for a moment, then closed it without taking anything. She sat down at the table. The notebook was still on the counter where she had left it that morning. She picked it up. She opened it to the inside cover. The number she had written 14 months ago was still there. The pencil faint now from the cover flexing open and closed for over a year. She looked at it. She turned the page. She had not turned the page before. She had only ever looked at the number. On the next page, in handwriting that was not hers, written in pen, were these words. "You did it, Mom. I've been watching you do it for 3 years, and I just want you to know that I know. I see every shift and every skipped lunch and every time you said, 'It's fine,' when it wasn't. I see all of it. You didn't have to be perfect. You just had to keep going. And you did. I love you more than I know how to say." There was no signature. She didn't need one. Elaine sat at the table with the notebook open in her hands. She read it again, then once more. Her mouth was open and nothing came out. She looked at the kitchen window, the one with the view of the brick wall. She had looked at 1,000 times in 3 years while doing the math, while remaking the math, while refusing to let the math win. She looked at it now. She looked at it now. She looked at the handwriting in the notebook. The pen, the deliberateness of it. Adrienne had written in pen. Of course she had. She cried. Not the quiet kind. Not the kind she had trained herself to produce in the bathroom with the door closed and the water running so nobody heard it on the other side of the thin apartment walls. The kind that does not ask permission. That comes from somewhere below the part of you that is still trying to manage things. That does not care about the time or the walls or what comes next. She sat at the kitchen table and she cried until she was done. Then she washed her face at the sink. She dried it on the dish towel. She picked up the notebook and carried it to the shelf beside the refrigerator, the one where she kept the mail she hadn't yet dealt with, and the pen she always lost, and the card from Lorraine that she had moved here from the kitchen drawer 6 months ago, and never moved again. She set the notebook on the shelf, opened to the page so the words faced out. She looked at it there, small, unremarkable, a notebook with a broken clasp that she had meant to replace for 2 years. Containing on the inside cover the number she had chased for 14 months. Containing on the next page the reason. She went to bed at 9:30. The next morning she woke at 5:43, which was when her body woke regardless of what the day required. She lay in the quiet for a moment. The apartment was still. No second set of footsteps in the hallway. No sound from the room across the hall. Just the refrigerator and the early morning traffic on Clover Street beginning its slow build-up. She got up. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window with the mug and looked at the brick wall of the building next door as the light changed from gray to pale and the morning began its ordinary business of continuing. She thought about calling Beverly. Then she thought about knocking on Lorraine's door. She did neither. She just stood there and drank her coffee and let the morning be what it was, which was quiet and hers and entirely different from every morning that had come before it. And that was enough. 3 months later, Adrienne called on a Tuesday evening. She talked for 40 minutes about a field research project her professor had invited her to join, a water quality study running through the following summer along the Wabash. She talked about the methodology. She talked about the other students on the team. She talked the way she talked when something had genuinely caught her, fully and without interruption. At the end she said, "How are you, Mom?" Elaine said, "I'm good." Adrienne said, "Yeah?" Elaine said, "Yes, actually yes." A pause. Adrienne said, "I'm glad." They said goodnight. Elaine put the phone down on the kitchen table. She looked at the shelf by the refrigerator. The notebook was still there, open to the same page. The words in pen, deliberate and unhurried, the way Adrienne did everything she had decided to commit to. Elaine turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed. Some people will tell you that a notebook with a broken clasp doesn't mean anything, that a daughter going to college doesn't erase 3 years of a showerhead that ran cold, and a rent that kept climbing, and a granola bar eaten at a desk because there wasn't time for anything else, that a woman who stretched $23.17 across a 4-hour drive deserved more than what she had, and they would be right about that. The math was always wrong. The system that produced the math was wrong. None of that stopped being true. But there is also this. A girl who used a pen instead of a pencil because she believed in committing to things, sat down before she left home and opened the notebook her mother carried everywhere and wrote on the page her mother had never turned to. Every word she had been holding for 3 years. She carried the knowing quietly, the way her mother had carried the math. She set it down the only way she knew how. And her mother found it on a Sunday night alone in a kitchen that was now quieter than it had ever been, and she read it, and she understood that she had not been unseen, not for a single day of it. If there is someone who has been carrying something like this for you, who has never heard you say that you saw it, this is the week to tell them. They already know you're watching. What they don't know is whether it mattered. Tell them it did. I keep thinking about the notebook with the broken clasp. Not the number written on the inside cover. Not the 14 months it took to reach it. The page after. The one Elaine had never turned to. The one her daughter had already filled. There's something in that image I can't let go of. A woman who carried a number in her pocket every single day. Who opened that notebook hundreds of times to check the math. Who never once turned the page. Because she was so focused on what still needed to happen that she didn't know there was already something waiting for her on the other side. I think that's what it looks like to give everything you have to someone else. You stop looking for anything in return. Not because you're noble about it, because you genuinely forget to. What struck me about Elaine wasn't the sacrifice itself, it was the quality of it. She didn't perform it, she didn't talk about it. She just kept her word, to herself, to her daughter, to the number in the notebook, day after day in a way that asked nothing back. That kind of steadiness, the kind that shows up when nobody's watching and nobody's applauding, is something I think we underestimate. We celebrate the big moments. The acceptance letter. The move-in day. We don't talk much about the Wednesday warehouse shift or the granola bar eaten at a desk because there wasn't time for lunch. But Adrienne saw it. She saw all of it. And here's what I believe about that. Children who are raised by people who keep going, who do the hard thing quietly and without making it someone else's burden, they learn something that cannot be taught in any classroom. They learn that difficulty is not the same as defeat. They learn to think clearly under pressure because they grew up watching someone do exactly that at the kitchen table with a pencil and a piece of notebook paper. They learn that character isn't what you say about yourself. It's what you do at 6 in the morning when you're tired, and the numbers still don't add up, and you get up anyway. Adrienne used a pen. She told Elaine once that pen meant commitment. I think about that a lot. At 18 years old, going into a world that was entirely new, she sat down and wrote in pen the thing she had been carrying for 3 years. She didn't say it. She wrote it. She chose the permanence of it deliberately. That's not an accident. That's what happens when someone raises you to believe that the things worth doing are worth doing all the way. I'm not sure what the right word is for what Elaine gave her daughter. It wasn't money, though she found the money. It wasn't opportunity, though she built it from $23.17 and a Saturday shift that smelled like cardboard. I think it was proof. Proof that when something matters, you don't give up on it. You don't let the math stop you. You change what you can change. And you show up for what you can't, and you keep the notebook close, and you trust that if you just keep going, eventually you turn the page and find out it was never empty to begin with. Adrienne is going to be okay. I knew it the moment she used the pen.